feel very much like the wild card here today. I think probably a lot of you aren't too sure why I'm here. I'm not entirely sure myself. I arrived in Perth yesterday for the first time in my life. I know next to nothing about Western Australia, even less about the Wheatbelt, but here I am. I do know a little bit about community development and some stuff we've been doing in Christchurch over the last 4 years or so, and I guess maybe particularly around retaining population, especially at a time when a lot of young people are leaving the city. So that's what I'm going to talk about, tell a little story about what we've been up to, and maybe we can draw some parallels. I don't know. So as most of you probably know, old news now, but 4 years ago, almost to the day, September 2010, Christchurch had a 7.1 magnitude earthquake. And pretty hot off the heels of that, a handful of us just ran a project. And that project led to another, and it led to the founding of a charitable trust, actually a second charitable trust, and a new festival in the city. And now I would say we're part of a movement in Christchurch. And there's just been an amazing resurgence of community activity. So that's what I'm going to talk about, giving people a stake in the city. So this is shortly after the September earthquake, and this was all over the city. So vacant sites where buildings had been demolished after the earthquakes, and lying fallow, property owners waiting for insurance payouts or architects to draft new plans or whatever it might be. And we had a very simple idea, which was just to view all of these problems, these eyesores around the city as a sort of opportunity. And so the nugget of the idea was just to activate, to turn these sites into public spaces. This was the site of one of my favorite restaurants, south of the border Mexican restaurant. It came down in the earthquake. That's what the site looked like. And our very first project was very simple, very basic. We just turned this site into that. Self-funded out of our own pocket, rolled out some AstroTurf, got some furniture from the dump, painted it up, made it look nice, and turned it into a sort of public space. We had someone selling coffees out of an old Bedford fire truck. You can just make out in the corner, maybe there it says bring a picnic, so it was important to us that this was a public space. It wasn't somewhere you had to pay to come and feel comfortable. It was just a space to hang out. And we occupied this site for 2 weeks. And probably just a few days before we opened our site to the public, we put a call out. We said, it'd be a good idea if we put a PA system and just have a kind of open mic if anyone wants to say anything or perform or whatever. And over the course of the 2 weeks, we ended up having about 32 bands play. Every day, people were just getting in touch and offering their services, so to speak. No one got paid anything. We had film screenings every night projected onto the bare wall of the building next door. Puppetry performances, we had hours and hours of poetry recitals, and we got really good turnouts. We had no budget, we didn't do any promotion or anything, and we found that we filled a real social need, but the social need was twofold. The need for public gathering spaces, we suspected that very strongly. We knew people would turn up because we'd lost so many cafes and restaurants and all the spaces where people were hanging out. What we didn't expect was the flip side of that, all the bands and musicians and poets and stuff. And I attribute that to, after the earthquakes, the government swooped in pretty quickly, declared the state of emergency, got civil defense on the ground and said, we've got it under control, we've got engineers, we've got planners, and the recovery's taken care of. And what we discovered is that a lot of people felt entirely left out of that recovery process. And so it may not look like much, but this little project was part of the recovery, was part of the rebuild of the city. And that's what we were feeling, and all the sort of artists and creative people who were getting involved felt that too. So we ran a couple projects, and then about 5 months on, we had a much bigger earthquake, or actually a slightly smaller earthquake, but the epicenter was right much closer to the central city. And in that one, it was far more damaging, and 185 people died. And as of about a year on from that earthquake, 70% of the downtown buildings have been demolished. These are entire city blocks that have 2 buildings left, 3 buildings left. So we've got a bit of a problem. And I lost my house, lost 80% of my possessions, and that's just a boring, common story, And we really didn't know if our little project had any sort of future, but a lot of people got in touch, and what we discovered was that there were lots of communities of interest a lot of little communities throughout the city that all needed to go through their own recovery process, and that somehow we'd unlocked this system where people could do this publicly, and that this was a really important part of resilience, I guess, not only creating the community, but demonstrating that you're recovering. So all of the city libraries were closed, and one of the out-of-work librarians got in touch and said, let's do some project near the library, book-related thing. So we salvaged an old refrigerator, and we invited people along to share books that had made them think differently in some ways, and we stocked the fridge and just left it there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Anyone can come up and borrow a book or leave a book. A social experiment. And it was going to be there for a month until the property owner was ready to rebuild. And about 3 years later, it's still there. And it's really just been embraced by that community. And so we have almost nothing to do with it now. Technically, we have a license agreement on the site. Our insurance covers, public liability insurance covers what goes on. But people in the neighborhood look after it. Just across in the little port town of Littleton, they lost every single bar and cafe in the town in the earthquake, and they'd never had a town square, so just a real dearth of public spaces to gather there. So we went over there and said, look, we're going to have a series of working bees. We're going to create some sort of public space. We don't know what we're going to do. Whoever turns up gets to be part of it and just figure out, what it's going to be. So this was a group of volunteers that turned up, and we just started, taking whatever materials were at hand and building furniture, tables, chairs. Littleton has a real strong musician community, so we left a little piece of the concrete slab of the building that was there before as a sort of raised stage. And we built a pétanque pitch, really for no other reason than it just requires minimal infrastructure. It was a real easy thing that you could do, in a day. And left bowls at the dairy across the street so people could borrow them at any time, and created a public space. And we had this launch event, had a bit of a sausage sizzle, and people turned up, said, okay, we've turned a vacant private site into public space. What we didn't expect was that I went back 2 weeks later, and people had added more furniture, and someone planted a little herb garden. And went back a few weeks later, and someone had, dug in and put a sandbox in there and left some kids' toys. Or went back one time, and someone or someones had kind of rebuilt the city in miniature in clay or whatever. And so it really demonstrated to us that if you involve people in the creation of something to begin with, they'll keep themselves involved and keep adding to it, and the community just grows. This is a picture of us building an office for ourselves. And actually, it wasn't even our idea. And this is what I mean, where the communities of interest started mobilizing around our organization. So there was an organization dedicated to sustainable habitat. And they actually got in touch with us and said, can we build you an office? We'll do it off-grid, out of waste materials. And so that's what we did. And we got volunteers involved and just built ourselves a little 10 square meter, so it didn't need to go through the building consent permitting process in council. And we occupied a vacant site with our own little office. We've done 55 odd projects now. We've developed a bicycle-powered cinema project, so we actually power the projector and the sound system using 10 actually people ride their own bikes in and hook them into the system. This was on a site where an old cycle shop used to be. This thing's called the Dance-O-Mat. It's just a dance floor, and inside the salvaged laundromat, so a coin-operated washing machine, we actually gutted it and waterproofed it, put in an amplifier, and underneath the lid is just a little headphone jack. And so you drop your coin in the slot, and it turns on the power and lights for half an hour, and you can play your own music, and it's just a little pop-up dance space. And it's used by, we were in contact with a lot of the dance groups in the community, all of whom had lost their rehearsal spaces because they were the ones that had the cheapest space you could find in the city. All of those buildings went. So the swing dancing group, uses it for social gatherings. The ballet started using it for rehearsals, and we've had a couple famous visitors as well. It's me in the background there. Met His Royal Highness. And we got more and more ambitious. This is a project we call the Pallet Pavilion. So we have 3,000 pallets that we just borrowed temporarily and built them into a structure. This is a consented building, so it can withstand earthquakes. It has fire alarms and emergency exits and emergency lighting. This is what it looks like from above. So it was just a space for anyone to run an event, community event, corporate event, anything at all. It's open 24 hours a day. We had free Wi-Fi, and people could just come and hang out there. And we had a couple people to manage the space and work on the events. But this is the real innovation of it. So we had 3 real constraints. We didn't want to destroy any of the pallets, so they all had to be able to go back into circulation, so it was low waste, almost no waste. It had to stand up to earthquakes, had to get certified by structural engineers, and we wanted to be able to build it with volunteers. And so the system we developed, actually, we salvaged the concrete slabs, were actually the 9th floor of a hotel that got demolished, and dynabolted the rebar in, and the construction system is just drilling 2 or 3 holes in every one of the pallets, little 8 mil holes, and then we just thread the pallets over the steel bars. So once we did the concrete foundation and the bars in there, about 80% of the construction work could be done with only a drill and volunteers willing to lift and thread these things over. And that's what really made the space, because when we had 250 people involved building it, gave about 2,500 hours, and they come there again and again and again. And when their friends visit from out of town, when their family visits, where are they going to take them? Here. Where do they have their birthday parties? Here. And so it created just an amazing sense of community, a really wide range of events that happened in there. And then the deconstruction itself, the building no longer exists, but the deconstruction itself was an important part of the process, where we actually turned it into a sort of celebration that all of the materials were going back into circulation, back into the shipping industry, and all the fruit crates that we'd used as chairs and tables and everything. We have had some study. In fact, we're included as one of the lead agencies in the 10-year economic development strategy for the region now, which is a bit funny. Maybe I should talk a bit more about that, but I haven't planned on it. But it doesn't require scale. I mean, I'm sort of showing off with some of our biggest projects, but actually, this is a project we did with some Polytech students, where they spent a weekend and just built, a little outdoor 10-pin bowling thing. And that was a way of them getting involved in the recovery. Had some crazy Brazilian architect get in touch, and he had an idea that he wanted to create a sort of Native American sweat lodge sauna and put it in public so that people could strip down and just hang out and have a sauna. And this is we don't have any good photos of it because it was at night, but this gives you a sense without the cover on it, just a potbelly stove in the middle of a tent. And he ran this on a main street over the weekend, and the nutters came out. What do you know? And in fact, most of these people didn't know each other before that night, and here they are. I mean, they feel like they own the city, and this is just, you probably won't see that in the Wheatbelt blueprint anywhere, but it does have an impact. And we have been, the economic impact is real. I mean, we've been featured in Lonely Planet, in New York Times as a city to visit in 2014, and the first sentence in both of those things mentions the Gap Filler organization. They're not talking about the big government recovery plan. I didn't grow up in Christchurch. I grew up in the Corn Belt in the US. You can barely see 3 little blue stars on there. I was born in rural Ohio. My dad got a job transfer, and we spent a couple years in Chicago, in the city. I loved it. And then he got a transfer after just a couple years, and we went back out into rural Indiana, and I spent most of my childhood dreaming of going back to Chicago. Lived in a small town in Indiana. My dad worked in a town called Bern, Indiana, which actually has a very high Amish population, so this was a pretty common sight on the streets when I was growing up, and I couldn't wait to get out of there. I was really good in school. Maths in particular came really easy to me, science, no problem. But actually, I really loved journalism, and was the editor of the school paper and things. I was actually just back in Indiana a couple of weeks ago visiting my parents because they sold our family home, moved a mile up the road into a smaller place. And so I was digging through old boxes there, and I found some of the old high school newspapers. And I don't know, reflecting on it just in the last couple of weeks. I mean, we were writing 14 years old, 15 years old, and we were doing stories about overcrowding in the school, teen smoking, students having abortions and stuff. This was, to us at the time, I mean, I was staying every second Monday, Tuesday night, I was staying at school till midnight working on this. This was, there was a group of us finding a great deal of meaning in this. But I was good at maths, and so I was pushed into engineering. Good at maths and science. And I went into engineering, left the journalism thing behind, and I found myself my first job. I did aeronautical engineering degree and went off to Fort Worth, Texas, and was working here at the F-16 assembly line plant. And this was, First day, turned up here. This is the largest air-conditioned building in the world, mile-long building. And at the far end of the building over there, you see little bits and pieces that kind of look like a wing or a bit of landing gear or something. And they take you on a tour your first day in a golf cart, and you just ride down from one end to the other, and suddenly the landing gear turns into a whole assembly and whatever, and at the other end you've got these whole F-16s. I was 19 years old. I thought it was, one of the coolest things ever. And then I turn up the next day, and they put me in building number 212, honestly, way at the end somewhere over there, and I never saw a plane again the whole time I was there. Truly. And I lasted there for a few months and thought, man, and it really was about that, having a sense of meaning or purpose, and that wasn't it for me. And I reacted badly and decided to get as far away as I possibly could, do a bit more study. So I went to Christchurch. My only criteria were that it was very far away and they spoke English mostly. English. Sorry. And somehow or other, and I really don't know the details of it, but after I was there for a few months, someone invited me to be involved in a really strange theater production. It was called The Last Days of Mankind, and it was done in public on the streets of Christchurch, and it was kind of, I guess, criticizing war, and criticizing how war turns humans into machines in a way. Somehow I got involved in this thing, and someone asked me, basically they gave me free rein. They said, do you want to be involved? And I said, all right. And they said, what do you want to do? And unfortunately, I have no pictures of it, but there was a group of us who were into these fighting video games, yeah? And so what I created using my engineering skills was this digital logic system where we had live actors who trained in stage combat, and then audiences could come up and press buttons, and it would send little signals to the actors to tell them how to move. And so we had live actors doing one of these kind of like Street Fighter games in costumes and so on. I'm just thinking what Alicia and Alana must have been thinking when they're looking at my slides when I handed them in, going, what on earth is he going to talk about? Sorry, thank you. So anyway, I created this thing, and a group of us, acted it out, and it was hilariously stupid, but it was something that I felt a sense of ownership over, or that I could really throw myself into. And I was hooked. I didn't leave Christchurch, and I've been there for 15 years now. And really, I see, if we look at these gap filler projects, it's really just an extension of that, someone gave me an opportunity to throw myself into something, and now that's what we're doing here. Both I'm throwing myself into this project, but actually we're just creating projects that give other people ways of bringing their own communities of interest in and throwing themselves into something and really having a stake in it. It used to be that everyone in Christchurch wanted to move to Wellington so that they could then move to Melbourne and then move to London. And actually now we're starting to reverse that trend. We've got people moving back to Christchurch from the cooler cities because they feel like something's going on there, something's possible. Those CPIT students that, made the little 10-pin bowling thing, they're talking to their friends that went off to university in Auckland and wherever, and their friends feel left out. And that's cool. So I don't really know what might have been different, what sort of projects or things like that could have got me to stay in Indiana and put my energies, into there, but it could have been something. And so it's certainly not for me to say, what the lessons are that can be drawn for the Wheatbelt or what the Wheatbelt can do, what sort of projects you can create here. I guess my only advice is find ways that people can take their existing interests and passions and whatever and channel them into something and feel like they have a stake in the place. So thanks very much.